Hello, this is Tony Sweet and Captain Ron for Truth Be Told. And again, we have another great guest. He's going to be one of the featured speakers at Contact in the Desert, and we'll tell you why here in a second. And you'll see why during the interview if you don't know this gentleman.
Awesome.
We have Russell Targ, who is a physicist and an author and a pioneer in developing of the laser and laser applications. He is the co-founder of the Stanford Research Institute, or you'll probably hear SRI lots in this interview, and he's an investigator, which they investigated psychic abilities in the 1970s and 80s. SRI is a research and development think tank, and I'm so excited to dive into this. And he is an author of many books, and I just watched the documentary Third Eye SPIES. So please welcome to Truth Be Told, the one and only. Listen, you're going to be amazed by this guy, Russell Targ. Thank you, sir, for being here.
It's a great honor, sir.
Very happy to be with you. I'm always happy to talk about psychic spying.
Right.
Well, yeah, listen, what I'm excited about is I like to, we have a lot of these kind of topics on the show, and I get a lot of flack for it, but now we have an actual verified scientist, a physicist, who looked at this topic, which is right up my alley, because this is credible, repeatable scientific studies. Let's jump right in and talk a little bit about the remote viewing studies that you did back in the day at SRI.
Well, remote viewing is an ability that we all have. That's the good news. And it's the ability we have to quiet our mind, look into the distance, look into the future, and experience what's going on there. The most interesting thing that I can tell you is that psychic abilities, remote viewing, is a non-local ability. And non-locality is a new hot topic in modern physics for the past decade or two. And by non-local, it means that it's no harder to describe what's going on in Soviet Siberia than it is for me to describe what's going on across the street in Palo Alto. And not only that, it's no harder to describe what's happening a day or a week into the future than it is to describe something simultaneous. So we can see into the distance, see into the future, and that does not degrade the accuracy or reliability of what we're doing. For example, the CIA gave us coordinates one time, geographical coordinates, and wanted Ingo Swann to describe what's going on there 3 days from now. So we just had these numbers on a slip of paper and had no idea what it is or where it is. We're sitting in a laboratory in Menlo Park, California. And Ingo said, "That's very pretty. It looks like a pyrotechnic display. I see all these beautiful fireworks in the sky, and there are trucks around the edge." And they said, "Is that all you see?" And he said, "That's pretty much it. It's a very, very nice pyrotechnic display, and that's what's going on. Let me draw it." And I gave him some colored pencils, and he drew this semicircles in the sky in different colors. And that was it. That took 10 minutes. 3 days from then, our contract monitor, Ken Kress, said, "Well, you guys really got a hit. What you're describing is a test of an atomic bomb on the east coast of China. They did their test and it failed. And although you may not know it, when an atomic bomb is tested and failed, you got burning uranium in the atmosphere, which is a beautiful, brilliant pyrotechnic display, no mushroom cloud. But what you guys saw is the beautiful pyrotechnic display. So we knew, because we knew we were targeting you on a Chinese bomb test, but nobody knew that it was going to fail. But you guys were able to tell 3 days in advance that they would light the bomb, it would not go off, and you just burn uranium. So this is a case where we could give a very accurate description of quite an unusual event 3 days in the future, and no person living or dead knew what the answer to that was.
This is beyond remote viewing. Not only did
Yeah,
he see
that's-
the image, it was predictive of what would happen. So that's the next
Well,
level
that's
up.
what we did for 2 decades at SRI.
Wow.
Can you tell me what's going on there now? Can you tell me what will be going on there? And we did a lot of things like that. Our film opens up with Jimmy Carter on camera, and he actually blew our cover with this little episode of his. He had asked us to describe the CIA asked us to find a downed Russian bomber in Africa. Right. And this was a Tupolev bomber that was fitted as a reconnaissance plane. So it was full of code books and fancy reconnaissance electronics. So it was even more interesting than a bomber, but they couldn't find it because it crashed in the jungle. And as a result of that, the CIA came to us in California because remote viewing is not hindered by the jungle as satellite photography is. There's Carter on camera says, well, we looked for it with satellite photography, but of course you can't see through the jungle canopy. So we asked this medium in California if she could find it, and she marked the coordinates on a map. And we went in with the CIA in a helicopter, and where we landed the helicopter, at that moment, there were natives or children pulling bits of metal out of the creek, and that was the plane we were looking for. So we were on the spot, and we found the airplane. And Jimmy Carter's on camera testifying to that. My feeling is if you can't trust Jimmy Carter, who could you trust?
Right.
There you go.
Right.
Russell, when you first saw people with this ability, when you guys first tried it and you realized somebody drew something on a piece of paper, put it in an envelope down the hall, and then they drew it there and it matched, how did you guys react? Like, oh my God, we stumbled into something? Or how did you guys come to grips with it?
Well, we didn't stumble into it. We had a brilliant psychic to tell us what to do. We were working with Ingo Swann, who is a lifelong psychic practitioner and a famous visionary artist. And he heard about our work and wanted to come to California and see what we're doing, because we seemed like we would be more up to speed than the decades-old Society for Psychical Research in New York. So he came, and we were just, there he is. And we were just as stupid as the researchers in New York. We want him to describe what's in the box, the picture in the envelope. And he said, look, if I want to know what's in the envelope, I'll open the envelope. I'm able to quiet my mind and focus my attention anywhere on the planet. I'm going home if you don't give me something more interesting to do.
Love that.
And I said, well, what do you want to do? He said, well, why don't one of you go hide someplace or find someone to hide in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I'll tell you what it looks like. That's what I do. I can focus my attention anywhere on the planet. Why don't we start with the San Francisco Bay Area? And he did that excellently. And the first series of trials that we did, we're not looking at geographical coordinates, but simply saying, our friend or our government contractor or whoever it was has been sent to some random location, half-hour drive from here. It could be a boat harbor or an airport or a bowling alley or a church or whatever. And I will sit with a psychic in the dark, and I will try and help that person quiet their mind to describe what it looks like where their friend is hiding. This is the kind of psychic hide and go seek. And that's what we opened with. We did that for about a half a year to demonstrate to the CIA that we were actually knew how to do something. So our first psychic who did that was the retired police commissioner, Pat Price, who was probably the most psychic person that we ever worked with overall. We had a lot of psychic people who could do different things, but Price was able to read hidden documents, which scared the hell out of the CIA and the DIA. But in the first series we did with Price, my partner Hal Puthoff would be sent to some random location. That's Ingo Swann. That's not Hal Puthoff.
Oh, let me grab one.
Hal Puthoff was my physicist colleague. And we did that 9 times in a row. 9 times in a row, I would be sitting with Price in a little shielded room, and I would say, okay, a half hour has gone by. Hal is somewhere in the Bay Area. What do you see? And he would say, it looks like an airport, it looks like a harbor, so forth. And we did 9 of those. So I had 9 transcripts from Price, and we could then match those or try and match them against the actual place. And a psychologist matched those up, getting 7 first place matches. There's odds of 1 in 100,000, highly publishable result. And what it means is that if Puthoff was actually kidnapped 9 days in a row, Price would have found him the first place he looked 7 out of those 9 times.
Wow.
Well, I want to ask you this.
So the CIA thought this might be actually useful.
Yeah.
So how did a young man that had practiced magicianship, became a physicist, worked on laser development, start the SRI, and then get involved into the CIA? So how did that start? Because I never really got that part of it. Why did you even
I had
want
a
to begin?
lifelong interest in psychic stuff. As a child, I was, as you can see me here, obviously my vision is very poor. So I was always getting my nose in anything in order to see it. And it turned out that I was very good at cards. And I was a serious duplicate bridge player. And I was interested in magic. And from time to time in my young teens, I would be on the stage trying to describe what somebody was thinking about. Now, of course, I had already read secretly the little piece of paper she had written. They call it billet reading, where somebody writes something down and then I hold it to my forehead, pretending to read it psychically. Of course, I had read the previous one, which is what, but anyway, I would sometimes have more information than was on a piece of paper. I've talked to Melbourne Christopher, who's a great magician, and the great Kreskin, who I've talked to a number of times. And the magicians agree we would never build an act on ESP, of course, but sometimes we can supplement our trick by whatever ESP comes our way. So I had those experiences. Like I would be standing on the stage and the woman somebody had written, "I've lost my dog." And obviously I don't know where the dog is, but I could get a flash of what her house looks like, where you enter the house and the stairway on the left, and you go up the stairs, and on her bed is a patchwork quilt. And she said, "My God, how could you know that?" And the audience is blown away because I supplemented my magic trick with ESP that filtered in. And
Wow.
I was interested my whole life in that. And by the time I got into college, I was then reading about what professional parapsychologists would do, card guessing, and the fact that people have precognitive dreams and so forth. And I thought that that would be a very interesting thing to do for a living,
Right.
but I knew that there's really no money in parapsychology,
Right.
at least not at that time. So I continued with naturally, a visually handicapped person gets interested in optics. What could be totally straightforward. So I was interested in optics in college and graduate school, and was given a chance to work in the earliest lasers. And I did that for about 15 years. But I was doing psychic stuff all along the same time. I built a ESP teaching machine, a 4-choice gadget where you have one of 4 choices and you press the right button and a bell rings.
Now
That
it's an
is-
iPhone app now.
That's an iPhone app. I make that
Yep.
available at no charge to the iTunes, and it's called ESP Trainer. And that was our first paid for contract at SRI. I was invited to a conference on speculative technology to talk about Soviet and American research, because there was not very much American research at the time, but I was interested in what the Russians were doing. So at this conference, I, of course, brought my ESP teaching machine gadget with me, and I had a chance to show it to Werner von Braun, who was there, and he did extremely well with the machine. So von Braun took me to Jim Fletcher, who is the administrator of NASA, and said, "This looks pretty cool," except cool wasn't invented yet. Why don't you give these guys some money? And Edgar Mitchell was there, fresh from his psychic experience in space. So I was together with my three new best friends, Edgar Mitchell, Werner von Braun, and Jim Fletcher. And they said, okay, we can do that. And that was that was our first program at SRI out of this very serendipitous meeting. I mean, nobody knew I was going to show up with an ESP teaching machine. ESP teaching machine didn't even exist except for the one that I made. But I got together with these three guys who actually had the money and the power to say yes to me. And then I went to SRI with a promise and with money. And Hal Puthoff was then already working there as a laser physicist, as I was. So the thing that made this work is that Puthoff and I were actually known as physicists who could do something. Both of us had done work for the CIA and for NASA. So I had actually pitched something like this to NASA in April before this conference. And the idea that I could teach people how to be psychic, and that might be useful for your agents. So they were already hip to the idea that this might be useful if it worked.
Now, did Russia implement this before the United States? Because I remember, yes, that's what I thought.
The key that made this all work was a book by two reporters, Ostrander and Schroeder. Let me say, you can see over my shoulder, there's a photograph of an airport. And under that photograph of the airport, there's a drawing of an airport. Well, I was doing experiments with Pat Price. Oh, good for you. I was doing experiments with Pat Price, and Hal was off in South America. So each day, Price had to describe where Hal was. And he described a church or a harbor or a volcano or something else. And on day 5, Price didn't show up. So with the spirit that the show must go on, I said, well, I'm sitting here in my soundproof booth. I've already said this is a remote viewing with Pat Price and Russ Targ. We're looking for Hal Puthoff. Why don't I just open my mouth and close my eyes and describe what I see? So what I saw was a airport on an island with a hangar on the left and grass and stones on the right, and ocean at the end of the runway. And what I drew turned out to be a remarkably good match for where I actually was. So the photograph above was taken later, and a picture at the bottom is what I drew. So the really good news here is what we keep saying is that remote viewing is so easy that even a scientist can do it.
You know what's interesting is the second I found out I had this psychic ability like you guys did, my first thought would be somehow to get off to Las Vegas and do some gambling. You guys actually tried something similar to that with the silver futures, right?
That's right. When I left SRI, I formed a little company called Delphi Associates with an experienced psychic, an enthusiastic investor, and a very clever broker. And the arrangement we made, we know that you can't say silver is going up tomorrow, because it's we would say in our lingo, it's front loaded. We knew that the Hunt brothers were in the market buying silver. So if you go and say, I want to buy silver, that's what my psychic impression is, my psychic impression will be loaded by the fact that that's what the Hunt brothers are doing, and it may or may not be correct. So what we did is something called associative remote viewing. The broker puts 4 objects on his desk. Let's say a coffee cup, a flower, a book, and in one case, his leftover pancake. And his assignment is that if silver goes up a lot, the coffee cup will be the answer. If it goes up a little, then the flower will be the answer. If it goes down a little, then the book is the answer. If it goes down a lot, the pancake is the answer. And by the answer, I mean, it's what I will show the psychic at the end of the week. So I'm in my kitchen with the psychic, and I said, okay, we're ready to go. John's got 4 objects on his desk, and I, of course, don't know what they are. And we will show you something on Friday. Here we are Monday. I'm going to show you something Friday. What do you see? What comes into your attention? And every remote viewing is like this. I say, tell me about the surprising image that comes into your awareness. And I use that lingo because I don't want him to be affected by the pots and pans in the kitchen or the cars parked in my driveway. I just say, only you know what's in your mind. You can't do this wrong. That's what I say. And they just tell me about the surprising things that show up, and we're going to show it to you Friday right here. And he might say, well, I see something round and it's kind of floppy and it's got a very funny smell. And as an experienced interviewer, I don't know what the answer is, but that sounds like remote viewing. That is, he's not guessing, he's telling me about these things that he's experiencing. So I would say that sounds good. Want some coffee? Let me call John and tell him what we got. So I call up John and say, tell me about your 4 objects. What have you got? He said, well, I got this coffee cup, flower, a book, and my leftover pancake from breakfast. Well, I think I would tell her, I think we nailed your pancake. What does that mean? He said, well, you get to see the pancake if silver goes down a lot by the end of the week. So we're done now. And in spite of the fact that the Hunt brothers are buying silver, we made our biggest hit in that particular trial where the market crashed on that Friday. We had sold $50,000 worth of silver, so we made a lot of money based on the fact that the guy saw a pancake.
That's awesome. But you say that this remote viewing is actually a very simple process. It's just a matter of turning off your conscious mind.
That's right.
Isn't that amazing?
And you don't need me either, but an interviewer is helpful if you're just beginning, because what I do is a kind of hypnotic induction. Now, I've never said that before on the air, but I'm now of an age where I can start telling the truth.
Yeah, let's hear it.
There you go.
So we don't act as though it's hypnosis, but what I'm telling him is quiet your mind, close your eyes, take a deep breath, and do something. And that's basically what an induction is. I once spoke, where this comes from is I once spoke to the American Society for Hypnosis years after I did this program. And I said, well, we don't use any drugs or no flashing lights, no hypnosis. And they laughed at me. The whole audience just laughed. And they said, well, what you're calling instruction is what we would call an induction. So I would never say to anybody this is a hypnotic procedure, but I'm catching on that in the beginning, the interviewer is really setting the stage, making this seem very safe, which it is. And people are able to do this quite well. Now in the film, I show my doing that with Hella Hammond on her very first trial. We had done this remarkable series of 9 trials with Pat Price. And the CIA wanted to know, well, we know that Ingo is psychic and Pat came in as a psychic policeman his whole life. Can't you find somebody who is an ordinary person. What does the control do? So I asked my friend Hella Hammond, who is by no means ordinary, but she wasn't known as a psychic. And she's a highly regarded professional photographer, born in Germany, lived in France, linguist, charming. You could take her anywhere. The wonderful, friendly woman, and lived in LA. And she thought it would be entertaining to come and be paid to be a psychic for the CIA. That would just be a hoot. And we liked each other. So she said, sure, I'll come and be a psychic for you, but you got to tell me what to do. I don't know anything about this. So on our first trial, I'm sitting there, she is. So I'm sitting with Hella, and she said, okay, Hal's hiding someplace. What am I supposed to do? And my magic words are, well, take a deep breath, relax, Hella. And Hal's at some interesting place in the Bay Area. Bay Area is full of interesting places, of course.
Right.
And I said, well, just tell me about the surprising image. What surprising shows up in your awareness? Don't guess. Don't try and name anything. Naming is the worst thing you can do. Just tell me about the surprising shape or form that pops into your mind. And she said, well, it's very odd. I see these squares within squares within squares. And where Hal had been sent was a pedestrian overpass crossing the 6 lanes of Bayshore Freeway. And he was standing at this maze of crisscross wire grids.
Perfect.
And if you show the photograph of where he was together with what she had drawn, good for you. So Hella made the drawing at the bottom. She said, I see squares within squares within squares, and Hal was at the place on the top. And this was her #1 first remote viewing. So
That's pretty
does not
dang good.
require years of practice. You don't have to give me all your money. You don't have to eat porridge at the feet of your guru. This is a natural ability. And the reason I wanted to make this film, reason I wanted to make Third Eye Spies, is to show people that young people are learning to do it. It's not difficult to do. Even a scientist can do it. And we show lots and lots of people doing remote viewing, including this little clip you showed with Hella, where we had the original audio of her saying that there's something moving quickly by. And then she said, there's a trough up in the air, but it's full of holes, so the water would leak out. And then she drew the squares within squares. And that was Hella's very first trial. This first thing she ever did like this. And that was a big shock for a CIA, because they wanted to find, and the payoff was we did 9 trials with Hella, and Hal was sent off to 9 different locations, undisclosed locations. And Hella described those each day, and her result was more significant even than the smartest man, the most psychic man in the world. Hella's results were significant at 1 in a million. So we published Pat in Nature magazine, and then we published we published Pat Price and Hella in the Proceedings of the Engineering Society. And this was a paper called Information Transmission Under Conditions of Sensory Shielding. Sounded just like a microwave paper. We did nothing but ESP in the title, just under conditions of shielding, long distance information transmission. You figure out how it's done. So we had no problem. Now, so one of the magic aspects is, in a certain sense, the time was right, the people were right, and so we did not have any problem getting money. People always think that how did you guys get millions of dollars a year? The answer is we asked for it, and we're the right people asking the right people. As we did not go to the NIH telling them we want to do this new study. We went to the CIA and said, we can help your psychics, we can help your agents on the ground become psychic and save their lives. Would that interest you? And they were interested.
Hey, Russell, real quick, we're going to have to take a quick break because we want George Norrie to have a little say. But when we come back, I want to find out how you picked your psychics and your intuitives. And so when we come back, I'd like to figure out how that happened, because back then it wasn't so. You didn't have the internet to look it up. You didn't have all these people with commercials. So when we get back, let's figure that out.
Remote viewers weren't even invented then.
Exactly. Right. So we'll be right back. This is Tony Sweet and Captain Ron for Truth Be Told. We have the amazing Russell Targ on the show. We're going to be at Contact in the Desert May 31st through June 3rd, 2019. So we'll be right back. Hey, George, what do you think?
Join me, George Norrie, in Indian Wells, California for the 7th Annual Contact in the Desert UFO Conference, May 31st to June 3rd. Contact in the Desert is an epic weekend of adventure filled with exciting explorations into ancient aliens, human origins, crop circles, UFO sightings, disclosure, and the newest evidence of ongoing contact. This amazing weekend offers over 50 lectures, 40 workshops, 8 exciting panels, special events, and a luncheon that I'm hosting. Contact in the Desert also features leading experts including Giorgio Tsoukalos, David Wilcock, Linda Moulton Howe, Michael Tellinger, Eric von Daniken, Doc Wallach, and many more important researchers and scientists in the field. Contact in the Desert is your place for inside information. Join us at thecontactinthedesert.com to get your tickets today. It's time to make contact. That's contactinthedesert.com. Don't miss it. Contactinthedesert.com.
And we don't want you to miss the amazing Russell Targ.
Reason enough to go.
Right.
For real.
That's one of the, if he was the only one, I would go.
That's right.
So Russell, before the break.
And the reason that I'm here is because I was invited to Contact in the Desert. I'll be showing the film we're talking about. I'm going to be showing Third Eye Spies, and I'll talk about it, tell you how it got made. And I will do a workshop where I show people how to do remote viewing, and I will lead people into a remote viewing, just as I did for a decade at SRI.
Oh, perfect. We don't want to miss that one. Well, and that leads us back to the remote viewers. We heard of psychics and stuff like that in those days, but we didn't really have them like all over the place. It's kind of a fad. There's everybody in their dog is kind of a psychic intuitive now. So back then, how did you vet your psychics, and where did you find the people that you did choose to be part of the research?
Well, we got a program going with this, some dough from NASA for a teaching machine, and Ingo Swan called us. He heard through the grapevine that there was a program, and he said he could come and help us. He'd be happy to work with us. So Ingo came out and got us away from guessing the card in the envelope,
right,
and taught us about remote viewing. And he gave us the name remote viewing as a lifelong psychic who lived as a psychic person. He wouldn't have interest in looking at an envelope. He could look down the street. He lived in New York and on the Bowery, and he just functioned. The Buddhists talk about timeless awareness. He says who you are is really timeless awareness. You're not the thing you see in the mirror in the morning. If you think that who you are is what you see in the mirror in the morning, you're in for a lot of suffering. The Buddhists teach that who you are is timeless awareness. You're able to move your awareness through space and time, and that's how Ingo functioned. So he gave us the picture that psychic abilities is infinitely bigger than the picture in the envelope. Pat Price was a police commissioner who by and by heard about our work, and within the neighborhood, he was selling Christmas trees in Mountain View, I'm told. And he offered to help us. Would we be interested in working with him? At that time, Kit Green at the CIA wanted to know if we could find things by coordinates. That was his contribution. And he gave us coordinates of something or other. And Ingo Swan had already described it, and it looked like a radar site. And we were just keeping that intact, getting ready to write that up when Pat Price called us. And my colleague Hal Potoff gave Price the coordinates, and Price said, well, he wrote us a long letter and said, yes, I see this big radar antenna and several small radar antennas. You can go into the building, cut in the side of the hill, and downstairs are a bunch of filing cabinets, and they're working on a project called Rack Up. And there are other projects called 8-ball and 14-ball and other things pertaining to billiards. And he gave us a whole letter, including quite a number of names, which we assumed. I mean, Hal and I had worked for CIA for a long time, and we assumed that these names were code names, project names for programs. Nobody told us that, but that was our guess. We knew that they weren't playing pool in the basement of the facility. So we wrote this all up and sent it to Kit Green, who'd given it to us. And it wasn't at all what he had expected. He expected something entirely different. So he drove up to the place that he knew about, which was a log cabin, which we did not describe. But because Kit Green's interest was tweaked, because both the psychics described the same sort of radar site. So he drove a couple of 100 meters down the road, found a turnoff, and what he turned off into is a super secret National Security Agency, NSA, listening post. But of course, Kit Green had all the tickets, so he could tell him who he was, the top CIA agent. He'd like to talk to somebody. And it turned out that the code words that Price described were, in fact, the names of ongoing top secret programs. The code words themselves were top secret. So you can imagine that all hell breaks loose. Kit Green has to give these documents to the NSA and to the CIA. The NSA was furious, not with us, but with Green. Why did you target your California psychics on this top secret crypto listening site? So we had the NSA and the CIA come to SRI and ask what the hell we think we're doing. Penetrate. This is not funny. And they asked the perpetrator here, was great psychic Pat Price, if you're so psychic, why did you describe the radar antennas of the code words? You're supposed to be describing the log cabin. And typical Pat Price, it says, well, as I was coming in at 50,000 feet, I, of course, saw the log cabin that I was targeted on, but the thing right in front of me was this collection of giant antennas. So I assumed that that's what you guys were after. So I came down, I wandered around and described what was right in front of me. He said, the way it is that the more attention you have on hiding something in psychic space, the more it shines like a beacon. And that, of course, scared the hell out of all these people whose lives are involved in hiding things. As every person who has a secret is focusing on their own paranoia that'll be discovered. And the more attention you have on hiding it, the more it shines in psychic space. That was Price's good word for us.
Yeah, let me ask you this. If it seems that we all have these abilities, it would support some of the philosophical beliefs where some people state that we all share one consciousness. Do you think that adds credibility to that, since we can all remote view what someone else is doing far away?
I think it adds credibility to the idea of one consciousness. It unfortunately does not add to the credibility of remote viewing, which people think is a priori impossible. Now, the Buddhists and the Hindus have believed for 2,500 years that the universe is filled with consciousness. The Buddhists write in the Prajnaparamita, the Buddha wrote that there's no separation in consciousness. There is only one consciousness. And Patanjali, who was a Hindu at that time, writing at that time, said that on your way to experiencing the divine, if you are quieting your mind successfully, you will be able to see into the distance, see into the future, diagnose illnesses, and heal the sick. And his book, known as The Sutras of Patanjali, is still available. So as an author like myself, I'm very excited that book,
Yeah, that's 1,200 years ago, right?
2,000 years old, is still
in print, right?
Now, I could mention that I've written this all up in a book published a couple of years ago called The Reality of ESP, which I show all these nice classified drawings, and I tell you what the Buddhists had to say. The Buddhists, thank you. This is a very interesting, comprehensive book, and it tells a chapter about what the Buddhists have to say, because I think they're on the right track. The Buddhists are the ones who said, first of all, the fellow on my right here with the shawl over his shoulder is Padmasambhava. He wrote a book in 800 AD called Self-Liberation Through Seeing with Naked Awareness. Sounds like something like about remote viewing. He said that your nature is timeless awareness. You have the ability, because of who you are, is to move your consciousness out of your head into time and across space. And in order to do that, you have to give up your desire to name the thing you're looking at. Naming and grasping is the enemy of ESP. And Padmasambhava totally understood that 1,200 years ago. So what I'm describing here is not New Age. This has been understood in detail. What it is, what happens, and how to do it has been understood for 2,000 years.
I'm surprised this wouldn't be more prevalent worldwide. If it's 1,200 years ago, clearly they understood how to do remote viewing, and it's such a simple thing, and everybody has the ability to do it. You think this would be a bigger thing and commonplace? Why do you think it's so obscure?
Well, there are a number of reasons. And this, first of all, in the 14th, 15th century, the church was very opposed to it because it was a heresy to even talk about consciousness. This consciousness was the province of the church, and doing anything like the church is afraid of freelance spirituality. That is, nobody gets any money off of this. You can't build a cathedral by teaching people how to do remote viewing. But if you have to go to the church and the church gives you permission to have a experience of the divine, that's worth some money on Sunday. And so the church was very opposed to things that looked like witchcraft. In fact, it's another story. So the church was very opposed to this. And then with the so-called Enlightenment, science was very opposed to anything psychic or spiritual, because science was just fighting to get clear of the church. That is, Galileo was imprisoned and threatened with death because he felt that these are natural phenomena. The moons rotate around Jupiter, and doesn't have anything to do with the deity. So scientists wanted to cut free of this religious overlay. So they're not interested in psychic stuff, and the church has never been interested in psychic stuff. So we really didn't have a home. In the 19th century, in Cambridge, the origin of the Society for Psychical Research was the spiritual realm, and the spiritualists were interested in communicating with the deceased. So they had a new legitimate home at Cambridge where quite a number of people were interested in survival of bodily death. And that was sort of the support for interest in, I was going to say non-local consciousness, and that would be it. That if somebody shows up to a medium with information that nobody knows about, then the deceased person is giving you information, and wherever that deceased person has their consciousness, it's outside of space and time.
Well, you just touched on my big question for the day, the big highlighted question I had for you. I'd like to, we've, on Truth Be Told, recently been talking a lot about life after death and consciousness going on, and I've almost been persuaded to be much more open to that idea. What is your take on survival after death?
I think the evidence for survival is very strong, as people have been carefully doing experiments for 100 years. The simple experiment is would be a thing that F.W. Myers did, published a big book in 1901 called Personality and the Survival of Bodily Death. I actually reprinted that. That book is still available. Big book by F.W. Myers on what survives and what makes him think so. So Myers was a sophisticated man, so he would send his servant to a medium, and the servant would have an envelope and said, Myers, my boss, wants to communicate with somebody who's deceased. Their name is in this envelope. I have no idea who it is. Can you bring me in contact with Myers' friend, whoever that is? And that was called something like contract mediumship. That's not quite right. I've forgotten the term of art, but it's the idea that the person who knows the answer is not in contact with the medium. They're worried about the medium reading my mind. So the medium just is sitting in front of the, and that worked very well. I won't go into it. In many cases that Myers describes, it sounds like long distance communication with the deceased person. And Myers was very reputable, was a university professor at Cambridge, and many people have done that. There are now hundreds of books of people who have had that kind of experience. And in fact, I had an experience like that, wherein my daughter had died 10 years ago, and she appeared to someone in a business situation. And the story I can only tell is my deceased daughter made herself known to somebody in that group and gave them some information and said, it'd be a great favor for me if you could give my father this information, because if you do that, he will then know that I survived.
Wow.
See, that's amazing. So something goes on, something carries on, whether it's soul or consciousness, or there's something after the point of death.
And that all happened because my daughter Elizabeth was a pretty well-known psychiatrist at that point. As she herself had done things. So if somebody showed up and claimed, I'm Elizabeth Targ, they would at least hear what she has to say. So that convinced me, because I was given information that I was the only living person who knew that information.
Wow, that's great. Well, Russell, before we get out of here, because I can't believe the time is going so fast, the chat room is just kind of blowing up, and there's a couple of questions, and I want to maybe put it in my own little terms here. First off, it says, how could remote viewing be linked with retrocausality?
Causality.
What is it? I can't, my eyes are...
Causality.
There we go.
You got it, brother.
Well, your consciousness can move through space and time. For consciousness, there is no time. In fact, Padmasambhava, 1,200 years ago, said your mind is not limited by cause and effect, which blew me away when I read that. You know, very that whole sentence is very sophisticated. But he was a very smart guy. Padmasambhava, the real historical person who brought Buddhism from India to Tibet. He invented Tibetan Buddhism. And he was also very interested in timeless awareness, which is what he called his book on the subject. And what he says is that since you're independent of time, you can look into the future, you can look into the past, so forth. There is no time for consciousness. the most common psychic experience that a person has in general is a precognitive dream, where you have a dream on Friday night of some crazy elephant that walked through your garden. Never happened before. There are no elephants where you live. Ridiculous thing. You tell your wife, I had this crazy dream about an elephant. And she said, what do you mean? Look out the window there. There's an elephant parading down the street. The circus has come to town. So I would say that Saturday's elephant was the cause of Friday night's dream. That's retrocausality,
Wow.
which is a hot topic right now in modern physics.
We call it synchronicity. We say that constantly. What are your thoughts on what people call synchronicity?
Synchronicity is, of course, at the same time.
No, we call synchronicity when exactly like you were saying. If Tony mentions to me the most obscure type of drink that I never heard of, and then I walk out of here and somebody offers me that drink, that's what we call synchronicity.
That's right. The example I was thinking, I'm going to meet somebody whose house I stayed at in Italy tonight.
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking about his nice house in Vicenza, and I couldn't remember the name of the architect who built all the stuff in Vicenza. I really couldn't remember that. And I was reading a book by Jacques Vallée. Vallée's book was on my lap. So I said, okay, to hell with Vicenza. And I turned the page, and Vallée says, and then there was a famous Italian medium named Palladino, and Palladino was the architect who built all the stuff in Vicenza.
That's exactly synchronicity. I love it. That happens to me all the time.
But having a dream about something that happened to you at a later time, we would call precognition. And see, you can get good at recognizing precognition. That is, I don't write down my dreams, but my idea is that you don't get credit for precognition unless you tell somebody about it before it happens. Oh. So if I have an unusual dream, very clear, bizarre, doesn't make any sense, but is very crystal clear, then I'll tell my wife I had this very interesting dream, and it frequently will occur within the next day.
Wow.
So I'm convinced.
So what do you think synchronicity means? Do you think that
I'm a fairly unreconstructed logical positivist, a physicist? I believe in data.
Oh, I love it. Love it.
But I open the channel on what's data a little bit more than other physicists might.
What do you think that means when you read that guy's name on the next page? What do you think that means to you?
I have absolutely no idea how that happens. No idea.
Yeah.
Because it's quite a long chain of events. I was in Italy 10 years ago. This is all stimulated by the fact that I'm going to see this guy I haven't seen for 10 years. And it reminded me of his nice house and tripping through Vicenza. And I like to be able to remember things. And it was so this is stimulated by the fact that I'm going to a meeting and visit with this physicist from Italy. So it had nothing to do with Vallée's book. I mean, there's no the chain of there is no chain of events that leads me because Vallée isn't even talking about the architect.
Right.
At all. He's not talking.
Right.
If Vallée said, well, on my last trip to Italy, where you see all the beautiful stuff. No, he's talking about the psychic who's a woman named Eusapia Palladino. And it just happens that it was the right name popped up.
Wow. Tony, do you have another?
Well, I was a lot of the people in the chat room were saying, well, if everybody has, this psychic ability and can remote view, and why did the CIA come after you? Well, not come after you, but they got interested in what you were doing, and even Pat Price. We didn't even get into his death. We'll have to talk about that at a later time. But they said, why are even the governments allowing any type of psychics, any Why would they not put psychics in jail to keep them from getting into government business? Why do you think that they're allowing that?
That's a very complicated story. I could tell you about that the next time.
Yes, do that.
In a sentence, Pat Price was taken from SRI. The CIA was nervous about this psychic who could read launch codes hanging out with enthusiastic hippies like me in California. They felt that was dangerous. So they took him to Virginia to work for them, and 4 months later he was dead.
Yeah, it's crazy.
And we'll have
We
to
spent a lot of time in our film Third Eye Spies. We spent quite a lot of time thinking about what could have killed this 55-year-old world-class psychic 4 months after he went to work for the CIA. That's one of the mysteries we deal with.
And that's a whole story in itself, and we'll definitely have to have you back for that. But in the meantime, coming up at Conscious Life Expo,
No, it's a Contact in the Desert.
You know what? Contact in the Desert, May 31st through June 3rd. Please come and join. Not just us, we'll be there interviewing and taking many of these workshops and seeing these lectures. But
come on out there. I'll show you how to do remote viewing.
oh, we will be there to do that. But
Meanwhile, they should watch Third Eye Spies.
oh yeah, please.
But
Please get that. You know, you can go to YouTube, and I'm sure there's other locations.
Amazon, that's where I
Amazon,
got.
you can find it anywhere. So, Russell,
iTunes, you can if you download from iTunes, you get a number of other things in addition at no
Oh,
cost.
great. Oh,
So
great.
The film is 2 hours long, and we really have 3 hours worth of stories to tell.
Right.
So the extra third hours is in another film you get for a bonus.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for being here. We really
Great
appreciate
honor.
you, and thank you for doing what you do. This is it's an honor to have you on the show.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to chat with you.
We'll see you at Contact.
At Contact.
Yes, in the desert.
All right. Take care. We'll talk to you soon. And everybody, this is Truth Be Told. Tony Sweet, Captain Ron. Until next time, thank you for supporting us. Subscribe to our channel, and make sure you listen to us on all of our podcasts, iHeart, Spotify, and all those places. So until then, we'll see you next time. Bye.
So long.